There we go. Wow. Okay, that was that was a lot to get started. Okay, you were saying family first. Let's get into the what were you saying? Get into the deep stuff
Yeah, let's do that, right? Let's get into the entire story, right? And I'll make it exciting.
because I don't even think did we even talk about that last time we were on the phone?
Briefly, briefly.
Slightly, because I know we
Yeah,
we talked mostly about music because we were trying to help out. Early, I was trying to help out somebody that
yeah,
was trying to get into that industry,
yeah,
which is kind of funny because actually, now that I think about it, one of my friends back home, he's been trying to do music for the longest time. And
yeah,
I think now that we will make this and I'll have this to send to him, and I think it'll help him immensely. It'll give him a lot of value and a starting place to go
yeah,
because he sent me an email the other day, not even the other day, I think it was a few weeks ago, saying that some things were going wrong and he wants to get jumped back into music, but it's I don't know what's going on over there. I think he's in California, so I might be able to connect you two anyway.
sure.
But yeah, as far as family goes, where in the world did you grow up? How did your family raise you? How did the whole thing? Where did JJ come from?
Yes. So my story begins in Silicon Valley in the 90s. So my parents had me when they were 18. My dad was a freshman at Santa Clara U, and my mom was a senior in high school. What's funny though is my mom is older than my dad. So they were 18 when they had me, and I end up, being born and being raised by teenagers. Right? So you can imagine not a very stable upbringing in that sense, understanding that the parents have the biggest impact on the child. So, right, like for instance, babies can see way more than the parents let off, right? Like parents are actually quite ignorant when it comes into the surroundings they place their babies in. So I would be going with my parents and their friends like to TGI Fridays when I was like 1, 2 years old, and I would be exposed to that kind of environment. And I just exposed to all of that kind of stuff, like the party, everything. Like I grew up, I've seen so many of like my parents and their friends. I've seen them drunk on so many occasions, like party, like just absolutely wasted. So I've seen that and I thought that was acceptable. But to go back a little bit, my parents had me, and then my dad graduated from Santa Clara University, which ends up being my alumni, right? Just hold that thought, right? That's programming to the T. So my mom and dad graduate from college. My dad graduates from my alumni. His sister graduates from the same college, Santa Clara University, and her husband as well. So by the time my natural learning abilities close, my parents are 25. But the great part about my upbringing is that my parents lived with my great grandparents at the time. And my great grandparents were born in 1920 and 1923, respectively. Great grandfather, World War II veteran, Bataan Death March survivor, prisoner of war, ended up becoming the barrio captain in the Philippines. So I had that sense of stability where my great grandparents were married 74 years.
Hmm.
So when I was basically being raised, my grandparents were in their 55th year of marriage and then onwards. So I was able to see that and experience that. And what's so fascinating is they live very old school. Like they never had a cell phone, never had laptops. I would see my great grandfather garden all the time. And there would be so many moments of just us three just hanging out, right? Like my great grandfather gardening all the time, bringing in the vegetables and then the food for my great grandmother to cook. So there was a symbiosis there that, to be quite honest, it's like I've held that as a certain standard within myself because I know, like I've seen it unconsciously. I'm like, that's how a relationship should be, right? Masculine man, feminine woman, like those roles.
From your
And
grandparents.
for my great grandparents,
Yeah.
right? Like just being in that environment, I understand, or I understood from a young age what a real relationship is like. So to fast forward a little bit, so I moved, my parents bought their own house and then moved from my great grandparents' house into their own house when I was 8 years old. And that's when the instability really kicked in, where there was a lot of, I mean, imagine there were 26, 27, like just trying to figure things out. Like my parents they started a clothing business, right? And it's actually my name, Jalen, but it just flipped the N and the J, so it's called Knowledge. So they ran the clothing business from 2005 to 2010. So that's where I learned about business. And of course, because my family was very programmed to be good in the system, go to school, get a great job. My grandmother was a director at Lockheed Martin, a defense company.
Mhm.
Uh, and they bought, they're baby boomers. So the system took care of them. They were able to get all their assets early on when it was cheap. So my family is really good in the system. My dad got his MBA. His sister got his MBA. My other aunt went to Stanford, right, as a doctor. That's my programming, right? That's my pre-programmed design. So how that relates to the music starts here. So I ended up going to Santa Clara University as well, the alumni of my dad, right? The same school. And it was then where I got started performing on stage and writing rhymes in class. Right? I linked up with two of my friends when we were freshmen, Brandon and Mike, and we created a group called The Wood. And we would just perform on talent shows at Santa Clara U. And my dad actually connected us with his old high school friend, Jerry, producer. He was signed to Madonna's old label company, Maverick Records. And he was like he toured in Japan and all that too. So he's done stuff in the industry. So Brandon and Mike and we record a song, and I ended up taking music seriously in terms of, man, it's very challenging to be in a group from the standpoint of being aligned without principles,
Yeah.
right? That's the crux of it. So I ended up going and making my own album, Knowledge. This is 2000 and so we started performing 2012, and then I started making my first album 2013.
Wait, so
While
how old are you
I was 18 years old
when you
when I
started your own thing on your own?
yes, 18 years old. So 18, 19 years old, I was making Knowledge. And at the time I was in a relationship, right? So I started out making that album while I was in a relationship. Um, yeah, wow, it's funny. So like, I just remember like she would go to the studio with me and all that kind of stuff, which is crazy to think about now. But it was cool, right? And what's up?
At 18.
At 18, at 18, and I mind you, I had a little sister. How old was Tasha at the time? She was 3. So I was like living like my parents did back in the 90s, just with my little sister and my girlfriend at the time. Talk about programming, right?
Literally repeating the exact same thing you had seen.
Same school, right? You have a little kid there, like studio. Like it was just it's bizarre to think about how we can never underestimate the program to which we've been programmed slash brainwashed to a certain extent.
Even when you were in that moment, when you were with your girlfriend in the studio with your sister, were you even aware that that was the same exact thing that you had grown up and seen watching?
No, no. What I always thought was I was unconsciously trying to be like my dad, right? Going to the same school and all that. So, excuse me. While all that is happening, I mind you, I grew up Catholic as well, so deeply religious. So I would go to church every Sunday, and um, it was such an interesting program, like growing up Catholic, because you really, it's like things are working, and you're like, thank you, God, right?
Yeah.
But you don't give yourself any credit, right? So as I'm making my first album, I finished my first album, Knowledge, July 2019. Couple weeks later, um, girlfriend breaks up with me. And it's right, and it's because I cheated on her, right? And it was devastating from the standpoint of what do I do now?
Mhm.
All I've seen is like all I've seen is relationships. You know, my parents together, my grandparents together, great grandparents together. What am I living for? So I didn't, right? I was like, oh man, like I made an album. What's funny is the girl at the time, she asked me, she's like, what are you gonna do with this? I'm like, I'm gonna take this to the top. She's like, what about us? I don't know. I don't know. Like, we'll see. So, um, after like we split, I started drinking a lot, like heavily, to the point where it was like
Started
welcome
going
weekend.
downhill.
What's up?
Started going downhill real quick.
Oh, quickly, bro. Like I wasn't drinking every day, but it was every time I drank, it was heavily, just like my dad. Right? So, I mean, because I mind you, I've seen them party, and it's funny seeing people like in their 20s have kids. I'm like, I've seen your parents fucked up on multiple occasions. I've also seen them with other people as well. That isn't, like you get this experience of life that you think life is just one big party, right? And you're just working a job and then you're partying on the weekend. That's life, right? So after we split, it's like welcome weekend. And the night before, like I had been out and I was talking to, a couple girls, and she saw like she started to talking to a couple guys, just that energy, right? And I remember saying like, oh man, like that was so painful. Like there's nothing worth living for. So if I go out, I'm just gonna numb myself. And at that time, I was really thinking like, what am I living for? There's nothing to live for. What a fucked up thought that is, right?
Wait,
There's
wait,
no
wait. How old were you again?
19.
19. You broke up with your girlfriend and it seems like the world's ending.
Yes. There's nothing to live for, right? So I drank 17 shots of Captain Morgan within an
Jesus.
hour and a half. Ended up driving, trying to go back to my villa, or like the condo where I was living, which was like a 10-minute walk. Me being young at the time, right? I drove and ended up hitting another car, right? And this is like on the party street. And to make a long story short, I got a .23 DUI when I was 19 years old, and the legal limit is .01.
Jesus.
What ended up happening was, and imagine that too, right? Like everybody in school saw me get arrested for the DUI. So there was that, but I don't even remember it. All I remember was waking up in the drunk tank with no shoes. Like, bro, what just happened? So I end up having to do 200 hours of community service, weekend work program, it's called. And there's no phone there, right? You're literally wasting time. 200 hours just wasting time, right? And I didn't make music in the studio for like 2, 3 years after that. So 2013, 2014, I make my first album. 2015, 2016, 2017, I was basically just suppressing myself,
Mhm.
like continuing to drink, doing all that stuff. The day that I finished doing the weekend work program was the first time I ever did cocaine. I was like, yeah, I finished this program, man. Fuck this shit, 200 hours. I was in San Francisco and like on a rooftop. I'm like, let's do coke,
Jumps
right?
right back into where you were.
Exactly. It was like, dude, it's why it's so, oh man, it's so crazy to talk about this now because I stopped drinking alcohol in 2017 when I was 22 years old,
Mhm.
right? I stopped all of that when I was 22, stopped going out, stopped partying, stopped all of that when I was 22, 29 now. So 2015, 16, 17, I'm just suppressing myself, getting drunk every weekend, smoking weed, right? And just going to like Coachella, popping Molly,
Do you
right? Like,
know? The usual things that people would do like in their early 20s.
The usual things, right? No purpose whatsoever. And I was working at Synopsys. So it's like is this semiconductor company. They end up acquiring the Software Integrity Group, and it's like a really stable company. And I graduated college in 2016, or I was supposed to graduate in 2016, but I had a job offer from Synopsys. So I decided to take that job and then take a summer school. Like I was still able to walk across stage with all of my classmates and all that kind of stuff, but I had to finish a class. But I wanted to get this experience first at Synopsys. I ended up leaving Synopsys the summer of 2017 to finish this summer school class. Ended up finishing the class, and I'm commuting to Genentech, which is where I was working at the time, taking the company bus, like 6 a.m., getting home at like, I don't know, 7, 8 p.m. Excuse me. So that there is no, right, for me, there at that time I knew this can't be life. There has to be a way out of this. I'm working Monday through Friday, getting up at 6 a.m., taking this company bus, getting home at 8 p.m. There's no way this can be life, right? So I end up leaving that job and taking music seriously at that point. I'm like, forget this. What do I like? I was looking at, what do I have? Well, I already made one album, right? Buying into that program of, okay, I'm just going to be a musician and do this full time, and somehow I'm going to break through and be famous and be rich. So I linked back up with Jerry, and I'm making my second album. It's called Opus Dei, which translates to work of God, ironically. As I'm still going to like church and like praying, like, oh, give me a sign. Like, what am I supposed to do? So I'm making this album, and this is 2018. I end up finishing the album around like June 2018. I go to Europe, like Spain, France, and England. I'm reading Think and Grow Rich in England. I'm like, I'm gonna make this happen. I'm gonna figure it out. I don't know how, but I'm gonna figure it out. And at that time, I had zero music on Apple Music, Spotify, no like business set up with any publishing rights organizations, knew nothing. I was just getting high, making music, and just riding around basically, right? I had no music on digital service platforms.
So you
So
would you say that you were then kind of just like living the life that we had seen. You and I had both grown up watching on TV, like just party all the time. You don't have to worry about working, just do the music, YouTube, or not YouTube, do the music MTV style life.
exactly, right? Literally like 106, but like MTV jams, right? Like 106 in Park. It's like, hey man, you're talented. You'll find a way, right? You could just have fun and just do all that kind of stuff.
Somebody will
But
pick you up.
yeah, not making any money with the music, right? Just living off of the savings that I had from when I was working. So what ended up happening was I was smoking a lot of weed at the time. And this is around like October 2018. My family ended up having like an intervention for me because there was drug abuse in my family. Right? Like my granddad's youngest brother was like a music prodigy, but he got mixed up with like gangs, and like he became like a gang leader out in San Francisco, ended up getting hooked on like PCP, angel dust, and then like tanked his life away. And then that's like it's a prevalent story in this because my family thought I was doing the same thing. I inhibited the same traits, musician, drugs, things are going to go awry, essentially. So they ended up having this intervention, and they wanted to send me to a sober living environment, saying that, hey, man, like you smoke synthetic weed. It's not real weed, it's synthetic weed. I was like, wait, you can't buy that at the dispensary, though. So this is critical because this is where a seed was planted. This became the starting point of the music. So I'm living out of my car for like 3 months by choice, right? Because I'm like, I'm not going to a sober living environment. Forget that. And mind you, I had like 10K saved up in a bank account that I could have used. I completely forgot about it. I was just high. So like I could have gotten my own place. I had money saved up. I'm like, I didn't realize this until 2019. I'm like, oh wow. dude, I could have used this. I just wasn't in the right mind, right? Or state of mind because of the weed, which is what weed does, right? So I'm living out my car struggling like 3 months, super spiteful. Like this is where the seed was planted of I'm gonna make this music and succeed only to prove my family wrong.
Mhm.
That was the entire starting point of it. So I end up going to the sober living environment. The car gets like traded back in, and I end up like going to the sober living environment for like 12 hours. Walked out the door the next morning. I'm like, dude, there are people strung out on like crystal meth here. Like people telling me, hey man, you got some really nice stuff. I'm like, bro, what is this? I'm like, you guys think I'm a drug addict? Like, no, all I did was smoke weed and go to church. So I was like, wait, I did everything right. I was going to church. I was, going to weekly mass. I was praying the rosary every day. I was doing Holy Communion, and I still went homeless. And I'm in my car, like praying like prayer book. Oh, Jesus, help me. That shit didn't fucking work. That shit didn't work. And that's when another seed was planted. I'm like, wait, hold on, I gotta question this. So two seeds were planted when I was living out my car. It was succeed in the music only to prove my family wrong. And also this Catholic thing, there must be something wrong because I was doing everything right. So I ended up staying with my friend, like sleeping on the floor on his like he was living with his parents at the time. I was like sleeping on the floor. And I'm thankful for that, man, because things ended up happening where my grandmother's sister, my grandma Eden, she told me, she said, hey, like this is bullshit. Come live with your great grandfather because he's 99 and like he could definitely use some help, like end of life care essentially. So New Year's Eve 2018 going into 2019, done being homeless, started living with my great grandfather. And then that's when there's a fissure within my family where my parents and my grandparents don't talk to each other. And to this day, they still don't talk to each other. My parents are saying, "Oh, you didn't follow our instructions," and
Oh,
to this day, they don't talk, right? And my little sister, and then I have a little brother, right? Same parents. My little brother's like 6 now. My sister's 14. So they were like 8 and around 1 at the time. They haven't seen my grandparents since, or like my dad's side of the family, and it's been that way. So for me, I was always processing that point of like, this is my fault. This is my fault. The reason why my siblings aren't and the family isn't the way it was is because of me.
mm,
So I had a lot of process, man. And like my mom always says, it's not your fault, right? Like, and I understand to a certain extent, but it's like my behavior and attitude at the time, like my actions at the time was a catalyst, right, for this to happen. It was gonna happen anyways, but this was like a catalyst. So I would blame myself a lot. And this will segue into self-forgiveness. So 2018, right? I have 2 albums. For January 2019, the second album goes on like Apple Music and Spotify and everything, right? It's finally available for people to listen to. And at the time, I'm making my third album. So 2019 is coming along. I'm like making a music video for my third album, and I'm in the studio recording it. 2020 happens, or well, my great grandfather passes away in 2019, and I'm living in my great grandparents' house by myself, right? Because my great grandfather passed away. So I'm there and I'm just gardening, right? And then the COVIDs happens, and I'm when everyone's like during that whole fiasco,
mm,
I go into the studio, re-recording classic OG. So like I re-recorded that album like 3 times because it wasn't good enough in my eyes.
right.
Right. I was like, I can make this better. So I'm making that album all of 2020. Right. I finished the album. It's mixed and mastered. And I want to release the album. So what ends up happening is I'm studying the music business at the time. Like, what do I need to do? Set up a publishing rights or organization, set my PRO up, with BMI. So I'm good to go. I have my DSPs, right? I have the distribution down. I'm masterminding with Jerry. He has connections in the industry. And I'm just like focused on getting the structure correct for the music. So that time is such an important period in my life because that's what taking music seriously is, understanding the business side of it. It's not just you make the music, you have to really understand the nuances of the industry. There are so many things that you need to be able to process when it comes to music. And I say this because 2020, I'm right, I'm really studying the music business and I'm also studying cryptocurrency,
Mhm.
right? Before the bull market. So um I I joined this financial newsletter. They recommend a coin, right? Shout out the Dollar Vigilante. They recommend a coin at 7 cents. I bought at 17 cents, right? 10,000 of these coins, right? It went all the way up to $16,
I remember you telling me about this.
right? And instead of liquidating at the time, right, I was hodling, right? Holding on for dear life. But I end up liquidating um at $5. So I have this capital to invest in the music. I put all of that 50K into the music, all of it. And what that was able to get me was airplay on the radio, right? Like I was showing you the charts, right? Sirius XM radio, right? So syndicated radio and then also commercial radio. So like FM and all that kind of stuff. We're talking about like Houston, Texas, Vegas, LA, Miami, Tampa, Baltimore, Greensboro, Jacksonville. Like we're talking about these cities, even in Montreal. Shout out Joel and Margot. Excuse me. So this is around like summertime 2021. At that time, I have magazine articles written about me. I hired a publicist actually out of South Africa. And this is all through Jerry, right? And then a publicist out of New York. So I'm hiring publicists with that chunk of change. And I'm getting onto, I, I am hip hop out in London. Not hot new hip hop, but another hip hop. Like I'm getting on these magazines, reputable magazines, right? And things are moving. For Classic OG, I promoted 5 singles out of pocket. 5 singles. So these 5 singles are being promoted on blogs and all that kind of stuff. And then with the rest of the money, I put it all into the radio. So and music videos, of course. So I have 2 songs, Live Live and Perfect Match, that are being spun simultaneously within an 8-week span. And just on commercial and just on syndicated radio, so Sirius XM, iHeartRadio, these songs were being spun 12,315 total times. And on FM radio, on commercial radio, one of the songs is Brent Fires featuring Drake, JJ Fennesser. Then you have Future, and then you have Rod Wave, Coil Ray, right? Like my music, my song Live Life is being spun on these radios amongst the people who are in the industry signed to record deals.
That was a list we just went through, like Roddy Ricch and all of them, like just one after another. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Her, Doja Cat, all of those artists, right? So I think I'm getting somewhere, right? And then I realized quickly, I'm like, holy crap, dude, in order to really break through as an independent artist, you need some capital. You need some capital and you need to do things strategically. The music industry is all about business. It's not about talent. It's about business, right? So mind you, I had some business programming, right? But my parents' business ended up failing, right? In 2010, their clothing business, 2 clothing stores got shut down. So after all of that, after summer 2021, after that bull run in the music industry for myself, right? I ended up getting introduced to Techno Tutor. And right when I got introduced to Techno Tutor, my main focus was still the starting point of I gotta prove my family wrong for what happened in 2018.
Right.
Right? It's like I gotta prove them wrong. And what ends up happening is I get introduced to Techno Tutor into this process and to this community where the starting point is the end point. And I learned quickly how what I was doing in the music was purely out of ego. There was no purpose in the music when I had started, right? It was all about proving my family wrong, becoming this person with this self-image, right? Who it's like living that rock star lifestyle, right? You get women, you get, you know, the money, and then you live like a nice lifestyle, like Floyd Mayweather in a sense, right? It's like you live that lifestyle. There's no purpose in it, right? There's zero purpose whatsoever. So as I've started using the tool and then started being immersed within the content of this community, self-perfected, ended up switching the starting point, understanding, wow, like the purpose of the music isn't to prove anyone wrong or to be this cool guy musician. It's actually to help people sell this educational tool, because it is only a tool where everyone learns the same can equality be created, right? And that's the starting point of the music. It's imagine if you had a Drake or Kevin Gates talk about Techno Tutor being like, hey man, this is the only way to educate your kids properly. We have kids who are reading grade 5 level books at 4.5. There are kids whose parents don't even speak English, and they're able to recognize letters and words in less than 24 months, right? Before they're 2,
Yep.
right? And there's so many children that are in our community who are able to do that because of this tool. And that's the way that we actually change the world, through education, by equalizing education. So the starting point for the music now is, let me use my platform, my influence, to infiltrate this industry to help everyone sell the greatest educational tool on earth. That's way more effective than trying to be famous just so I could get with a bunch of women, obviously, right? Like, and that goes to show, right? And I mentioned the seed of like Catholicism, right? What I realized was, once I started looking into things and questioning things, was how me always praying and doing all of that was just me abdicating responsibility, creating separation, right? It's like, wow, let me actually live the message of Jesus, or Yahusha, in whichever, right? For the Hebrew Israelites, right? Let me actually live the message by selling this tool, because this community is actually living the message, right? So within all of that, you know, what I've accomplished after I got Techno Tutor was, I got verified on Instagram, right?
Before you could get the subscription and the
Before you could buy the subscription, right?
yeah.
In 2022, I got verified on Instagram less than what, 6 months when I got this tool. Within 6 months after I got this tool, got verified on Instagram before you could subscribe to it,
Yeah.
right? Um,
And to put that into perspective, like there's plenty of people that have a lot of influence in the not only the music industry, but also like the movie and TV industry that haven't even gotten verified, and they've been all over the
right.
place for years, and they're still not at that point. But obviously, they probably are now since you can just pay for it. But yeah, I see.
Right. The cool thing is you can actually go to my profile at JJ Fennesser, click on the top, and you can check when I got verified on Instagram. So you can basically see, oh, anybody who got verified after or with like 2023, they obviously subscribed to it. Previous to it, they must have done something. And I'm saying that because even like when I got Techno Tutor, #1 on college radio, right? I got the music in like I'm still doing my thing in the music, using Techno Tutor to program myself to do my thing in the music, right? And what's interesting is I was able to process way more information to make the music even that much better, right?
That's where I was, yeah, because we were just before we started this, you were going into like the rhythm, the tonality you need to be able to have, the ability to come up with new ideas and use your words to your advantage, because that's the whole part that makes your music
Yes.
separate from everybody else, is the message
Yes.
idea that you can have and create that nobody else is.
Right. It's the vocabulary. My entire catalog, right? Like you can, I always say the music is a time capsule, so you can listen to my entire catalog and you can tell like I'm creating a deluxe version of my album Making Love Real right now. And that's the first piece of art that I've created with Techno Tutor. And you can tell the difference between classic OG and Techno Tutor in the sense of vocabulary. And I don't cuss in my music. I stopped cussing in my music when I made Opus Dei. So this is 2018, right? Like I don't drink alcohol, don't smoke weed, don't watch porn, none of that, right? So you can tell within the music that there's a certain level of vocabulary within the music that is because of this tool. And what's great about what I'm doing now in the music is I've transitioned, not transition, that's the wrong word. Well, I've switched my yeah, right. It's like
You
it's
gotta be
in the
careful. You gotta be careful using that word now.
dude, I know, right? I'm like, oh man, like I pivoted and I switched my focus from trying to break through in the music industry into the film industry. See, that's where the money's made with sync licensing. That's where it's actually made because the Spotify pays 0.00437 cents per stream, Apple Music 0.00783 cents per stream. So you're getting less than a penny for each stream. Is your art worth more? Obviously. But if you could do 30 seconds of your song and doing it for sync licensing, you can make $5,000 to $10,000 just from sync licensing. That's how Lizzo blew up, right? She released a song in 2016, ended up getting a sync placement for a show on Netflix, and then her whole catalog blew up. And with all of the layoffs now that are going on at all the big three, Universal, Warner, and Sony, there's so many layoffs that are going on right now in their marketing and their promo section, and radio's next. So things are changing dynamically right now in the music industry. Now, imagine you had a tool where you can process all of that and properly position yourself to be able to succeed, right? So I've switched my focus from music industry to film industry. And that's all because of the process that we have here with Techno Tutor and self-forgiveness. Right? I've had to forgive myself for blaming myself to think that I'm the reason why my family split. With all of the material that we have to study here, right? I've understood. It's like, nah, man, like this system is literally programmed to do what it does, which is to abuse people. And children are being abused right now as we speak, and parents have no idea they're abusing their children,
Because it's been
giving
going
them
on for so long that it's become the norm. But
yes,
okay, actually, hold on. I wanna back up to that, because when you were doing before you had TT, like when you were doing music and there was no self-forgiveness, there was no TT, what was the cycle that you were seeing, like the downhill cycle you were seeing, that like through the drinking, through smoking, through just the normal day-to-day things you were doing, where did you see that it was going?
where I saw it was going was this. It would be building up, and then I would smoke weed, right? And then I would think about everybody in my family like dying, like everyone's gonna die. And then it was like that emotional attachment to the bullshit, right? Like placating to other people because you understand the mortality of life. It's so fucked up, right? You get so trapped in your mind when you smoke weed, right? And it is like that's the cycle. It would be build up, be afraid of change, smoke weed to feel comfortable again.
And then do it over and over again, and then
Do
yeah.
do it over again. Use the weed in order to like, and weed makes you super emotional, right? You build up, build up. Oh, get scared of change, get scared of success, smoke weed. All right, I'm comfortable again. You'd be like, fuck, I fucked up. All right, I got it. And you get scared, boom, smoke weed again, right? And again, I also should mention, like, I was very like isolated during that time, right? It was just me. I was on my Tupac, me against the world, basically. That's not that's not what's best. That's a program. Me Against the World is a program. You
Yeah.
cannot defeat the world or conquer the world by yourself. But why even conquer the world? Why not make a world that's best for all in a community? Like why the need for combat, for competition? That's the program that's put on by society, by school,
Well, you see
you
that
know?
everywhere because even like I grew up the same way, hearing the same thing in the movies and the music with Tupac. Like it's you're what's the not the wolf pack, the opposite. It's like I'm a one man
Lone
team.
wolf.
I don't work well. Yeah, lone wolf. I don't work well with others. And that gets, you hear that over and over and over again in so many different things. And I thought the same thing. I would do the same thing you said. I would isolate, be like, nope, I'm just the lone wolf. I do it on my own. I can get things done way faster, way better if I do it by myself. But then coming out and using TT myself too is just like seeing the whole system as like everyone who has influence and control has a team behind them, has a system of people they trust behind them so they can get to where they want to be. It completely flipped. Like I've been listening to this crap this whole time and I believed it.
Yeah. And it's all crap. I should mention this, right? When I was in during 2020, this is how much I would go into the study of music. I used to hop on a lot of like virtual summits during that time. So I hopped on a lot of virtual seminars in 2020. And one of the seminars was it was a TDV summit, the Dollar Vigilante Summit. And one of the speakers was Foster Gamble, who made the movie Thrive from the conglomerate Procter and Gamble. And I was studying this, but I really wanted to get clarification on it. I asked him, what is the difference between music that's tuned to A440 hertz than A432 hertz? For those who don't know, the Rockefeller Institute instituted, fun words, 440 hertz as the natural standard tuning frequency in the 1960s. And what that A440 hertz frequency is the most unnatural frequency, which causes angst, anger, anxiety. Parlay that into the fact that the private prisons, the people who own the private prisons, own the music industry and co-opted hip hop to make a gangster rap so that they could fill the private prisons. A440 hertz, the people who own the music industry own the private prisons. You have a recipe to fill the private prisons right there. You get the violence, right? You get all that. You get that kind of angst in the music. Whereas when I asked Foster Gamble the A432 hertz frequency, he shared with me A432 hertz is the most natural frequency. It is through that frequency where you can gain access you can gain benefit. You can gain the benefits of accessing the unified field, essentially. So I tune all my music to 432 hertz, which reduces your anxiety, lowers the resting heart rate, and synchronizes both brain hemispheres. So you can't even see it. You just have to listen. You just have to listen to it. So you're getting a benefit from listening to my music and you can't even see it.
Yeah.
And that's the value and the service that's in my music now, rather than trying to prove everyone wrong. It's, hey, let me actually help people with my music. And then also, and helping them is also like sharing the greatest educational tool, in which if everyone uses this tool and replace their TVs with this tool, we can actually create a world that's best because we'll all be educated, because the average American has the reading and comprehension level of a third grader.
Right.
So obviously there's a problem there. Even Frederick Douglass talks about it, right? Like when Frederick Douglass was a young boy, his slave master's wife would teach him how to read, right? So once the slave master found out about it, told his wife, don't ever do that, right? And that's when Frederick Douglass knew the key to freedom is education, literacy. That's a bar. That's a
Real, real education, not
real,
the
a real education. Every word you can spell, comprehend, and process.
Yeah. Okay, so then for everybody listening to this who's either in music industry or not in the music industry, is there anything you would tell them that they would need to do, need to look at, need to research, anything they would need that would be helpful to, I guess, move forward and get their actually go to where they're wanting to go? Is there anything you
right?
would?
What I would tell them is this: you really have to be able to process information. You really have to increase your processing ability because there's so much to learn in the music industry when it comes to licensing, when it comes to actually getting your royalties. Like you got to read those forms, right? You got to read the agreements when you put your music on DSPs. You got to read all of that stuff. Even if you want to break through and talk to a record executive, you have to have your business put in place first before you can even get looked at. You give yourself a higher likelihood to succeed if you have things in place before, if you have all the prerequisites in place, if you have your business set up. But in order to do that, you're going to have to learn how to read properly and process information. I'm not joking, everyone. If you really want to make, you have to study. You have to learn about this. Remember, like this is your art. Take some pride in it, study it, right? Like this isn't just something where you get rich quick and you get discovered. That's a program from all the movies that you saw there. All of a sudden you get discovered. You can't even go like Jodeci, for instance, right? They drove from North Carolina to New York to Uptown Records to go get signed, to get their demo heard. You can't, that's back in the 90s. It's 30 years ago. You can't do that anymore. That's not going to work. You have to be adaptable and you have to be flexible in the way you approach and look at things. But in order to do that, you're going to have to study and to actually be able to process information quickly because the music industry is changing right now as we speak real time. Look at all the layouts at Universal. Just again, right? You're going to have to study in order to actually process what's going on to see the patterns. That way you can position yourself in order to succeed.
Mhm. Right. And for the people that are watching, if that is just too much and too difficult, like we have the groups, we have the tools to make this a lot easier and for you to actually be able to do this. So if they want to listen to all your music and find all your stuff, where are they going to go?
Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you find music, YouTube, Tidal, JJ Fennesser, right? Instagram, Twitter, social media at JJ Fennesser. I actually have a new single that's coming out called Miss Vanessa. It's coming out soon. It's going on radio as we speak right now. I got word, and the great thing about like my music, I like to say it's Renaissance hip hop, right? Because hip hop's a way of life. Right? There's so many facets to hip hop. Hip hop's a way of life, and it's Renaissance hip hop, or if you like to call it Motown rap, meaning there's a certain essence of the music, right? And to all the artists out there, like this is what made hip hop so beautiful in like the golden age in the 90s. Everyone had their own distinct style, right? Everyone had their own distinct style, right? You had a Tribe Called Quest, you had the De La Souls, even Keith Murray. My favorite rapper is Big L, right? So everyone had their distinct style.
Mm.
So if you create a certain type of music, like lean into it. Stop rapping like everyone else or creating music like everyone else.
Please, yes, please stop doing that.
You know what's so funny, dude? And this isn't to hate on anyone or at all, but this is just the fact of the matter. It's so important to study, right? Like that's why I study like the OGs, classic OG, right? Like I've studied so much of this music. I've studied so much hip hop in my life. Like I got a bundle of CDs in here, right? Like this is all I study, right? And from studying all of that music, what I've noticed is a lot of people just don't know how to rap nowadays. They just don't know how to rap because they haven't studied it.
Mhm.
They just follow a lot of the trends and rap off beat. Like, I mean, Silk the Shocker used to rap off beat, but that went hard in the 90s, right? Like, a lot of these artists just don't know how to rap. And there's a pure art of rapping. And that's why I do it. Because with hip hop, you can actually educate. That's one of the pillars of hip hop to teach. That's why I'm a real MC. I don't cuss in the music, just like Rakim never cuss, right? Going to a KRS-One concert, seeing how KRS-One moves the crowd. That's a real MC right there. And the purpose for me now within the music is to be on that real MC, but to teach with what's actually best for all.
Yeah.
Like live with principles and purpose. That's the whole crux of the music now. And that's why I still do it.
Because I feel like the people in the music industry that have principles and have a reason to do this, and they're trying to get a certain message across, they will last a whole lot longer than anybody else will, especially with all the AI stuff that's coming out to probably replace most of them anyway. But that's a whole
Yes.
other conversation.
Of a conversation, man. But again, like you bring up a great point. It's about longevity. And what happens when AI, right? I could get a verse by Nate Dogg right now. Nate Dogg's, it's past, right? I could do an AI with like Tupac. Like what happens? The in person is that much more important.
Yeah. Cool. Well, we got to jump on the next call, so we can just end it right there. But appreciate you being on, man. I'm gonna go ahead and have this up for everybody, and then through the comments, or not the comments, through the description, I'm gonna put all your links and everything so they can get a hold of you.
Sure. All right, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, man. See you guys.